means the phone that you have is more powerful than that. And it was one giant leap for, you can continue the phrase. And so basically it simply means that the capabilities that you have are seriously disruptive. And maybe that's a jargon we continue to hear over a very long period of time. And so the disruptions are shaping government, and that is where I come from, even though we are the dinosaurs of these technologies. It's shaping education, healthcare, and all aspects of life. Quickly, what are the trends? I think trends for us, we are seeing digitization. And digitization is likened to, we're seeing a fire hose of data. And I'm careful around using that word, fire hose. How many have seen a fire hose? The guys who put off fire. So that's the kind of amount of data that comes at you. It's a lot. And so it's becoming increasingly difficult for humans to process that kind of data per second, per nanosecond. And therefore, you kind of need machines to help you do that. And that is why some of my colleagues were talking about artificial intelligence. There's something around integration, that we no longer have silo systems. We actually have integrated systems. I mentioned somebody wearing an Apple Watch. That means you can tell time, you no longer need to buy a separate watch. You can take a photograph with your phone, it reads your pulse, and a lot of those things. So integration is real. The third bit, of course, is smartization. Everything is smart. Smartwatch, smartphone, smart this, smart that. Unfortunately, humans are not getting smarter, but we will talk about that. Virtualization, a lot of things are online. You're hearing about cloud. Please don't look up. It's not going to rain. Cloud simply means data is being stored somewhere else. And so I think for me, if you look at a lot of those things, then why this revolution is called the fifth. The first factor, especially because these are UNDP gathering, is globalization. We're operating in a world without borders, and so technology simply made that even easier. We are seeing people more connecting to work than going to work. I'm sure a lot of you are either on a Zoom call, on a Skype, or there are so many of those things. I no longer can keep track. But the idea is that you're actually connecting to work, and you do not necessarily have to be in your office and work. For Africans, and this is interesting, and Michael can attest to this, is that we realize in a country like Kenya, we have 4,000 plus young people who are e-residents of Estonia. So we have Africans who are residents of a European country, paying taxes and working while living in the continent, and paying taxes there. So what does that do to the tax base of governments in Africa? Think about that. The second thing we are seeing is online work. There's a website called Upwork, and I bet you most of your employees are working on Upwork. If you check LinkedIn data, Upwork is the largest employer in the continent. Beats hands down anybody employing anybody else. Upwork simply means freelancing. Young people are getting on, bidding for jobs, making money out of it. And we're seeing that happening because we have connectivity and they can connect and deliver. Upwork collectively has 16 million freelancers. And that becomes kind of the future of what we're seeing. Freelancing is going to be a big deal. Mobility, of course, is a big part of this thing. New behaviors where everything is public. We've tweeted away this conference. Everybody who's not here knows we're here and is busy tweeting and chatting and connecting with us. But you're also tweeting not only content, but the selfies that we've been doing outside there. So the personal and the work life is increasingly getting connected. We're increasingly seeing co-working spaces being the mode of where people work. In Kenya, we have more than 28 co-working spaces only in the city of Nairobi. What does that do to urban planning? What does that do to the models of how we plan for offices? Because then young people do not necessarily have to own that infrastructure. Of course, the other bit is technology, which is why we're here. But the technology I'm talking about is not your user technology. It's big data, it's Internet of Things, it's robotics, it's automations, it's wearables automation, and more. The last one, I think for me, is more or less millennials. In the last panel, we were asked how many people are below 20 years old. Anybody under 20 in the room? Your heart? At heart. So the median age of the continent is 19.1. Of Africa, that is. Those are millennials. And they have new behaviors and new trends. And so I think for me, the big question is how are we involving them if they are the trends. The other bit, of course, is simply how companies are changing. 15 years ago, the most valuable companies were either banking sector or oil sector. This year, top 5 most valuable companies in order: Apple, Google, Microsoft, Facebook, Amazon. What do they have in common? All technology companies with no single asset base. The only asset they have is what? We say it together: data. Oh, you don't know that? You didn't know that? Okay. And we move on quickly, swiftly. And so, if you think about that, then what type of infrastructure are we building? I heard in the morning people talking about CFTA. What infrastructure is that? 5 most valuable companies trade on data. What infrastructure are we building? Where does data travel? Roads? Where does data travel? This was not the scary session. This was supposed to be the fun session. Data travels online. So if we're still investing in brick and mortar, we need to think again. We need to start thinking around investing in things that matter in this revolution. Connecting that with a quick way future of work, at least I say millennials will make 50% of the workforce in the next 5 years. That's 75%. So I've shown you how they operate, what they use, how they use. Some are simply mobile only. They've never seen a laptop. They've never seen any other infrastructure. And so how are we building and planning the future of Africa if these are the infrastructures we're not investing in? The other bit is that, for sure, is to start thinking around disruptions. 75 million jobs will be disrupted by next year. 75 million jobs. And if you hold any of these jobs, I am accepting CVs. If you're a data clerk, please start applying for another job. If you are client information customer service officer, please start applying for another job. If you're in a postal service, if you're an accountant or an auditor, I suggest you start applying for another job. It's that serious. But the good side is 133 million jobs will be created. So if you are anywhere around data analyst or a scientist, you're in a good place. If you're anywhere around artificial intelligence and machine learning, you're in a good place. And I'll rest in those two, because there's no African university or institution that is churning those two talents. We are not doing it. And those who are learning on their own online are being snapped up by your Facebooks, Googles, WhatsApps. They're all going. And we can tell you they're all landing in Dublin, because that's where all our friends are, right? So start thinking about, even if you're thinking that, where is the real space of contestation? And so how do you begin to invest in the infrastructure that matters? But again, if we say there are disruptions, then it means, what are we doing about reskilling? 54% of all of us will have to be reskilled by 2022, simply because of disruptions. Stanbic Bank just closed 100 branches in South Africa, simply because they did not reskill anybody to be able to work with artificial intelligence machines. You are all on banking apps. You're not understanding what that means to a physical banking location, because then it means people have to be disrupted, and then other people have to man other machines. And I think for me, that's basically how we see it. How do you, as Africa, as much as you're thinking about a future without aid and Africa's money for Africa development, begin to understand the terrain of the future of development is about technology, it's about innovation, it's about data. And it's about skilling, reskilling, upskilling. It's about creating more talent on capacities. That means it's not about careers, it's about skills. It's about disruptions, but it's about how do we create what we're increasingly calling a learning agility, right? A learning agility that begins to support these industries of the future, and that's what we're increasingly calling it. How do we support these industries of the future that are not brick and mortar, but are really where the African population and young people are able to harness these technologies and to create new energies and new industries? We have about, I think, 60 hubs, labs, spaces in the continent that are fully in most cases, supported by venture capitalists not in the continent, by foundations that are not African, and in most cases, those innovations are owned or snapped up by them. And so over the last 10 years, which really has been the life cycle of our innovation ecosystem, we don't have innovations on businesses that scale. When you come to governments, and some of us are culprits, a country like Kenya, 25% of all ag startups type tech companies are all based in, 25% of all Africa ag type startups are based in Kenya. Not a single one is working with government because of archaic procurement policies. So how do you procure an innovation? It's supposed to be unique, right? So how do we ensure that our PFM responds and resonates with that? How do we ensure that our banking sector recognizes that as much as Facebook would not have flourished in Africa, I dare you. They had no infrastructure, they had no collateral, they had no building, they had nothing. It was an app, yet it was funded. So how do you fund innovations with that mindset so that Africa's money recognizes the changing trends so that we can build exponential companies that create value for Africans? When I say exponential, WhatsApp valued 3 billion with 55 employees. How many people thought WhatsApp had more employees than 55? So that's the trend. So how do we support many WhatsApps, many Facebooks, many Instagrams, so that Africans can be able to create value out of their products, but also earn a decent income and scale our companies so that we can compete globally? And I think with that, Michael, I would leave my shock therapy.
Thank you very much, Philip. A round of applause for him. So, ladies and gentlemen, I want to provide some guardrails to the panelists who are here because, as you know, technology and innovation and the future of work is a very broad subject matter. And in context and in line with what these cluster meetings have been put together for, first and foremost, we've got over 45 different African countries which are here with us, and also the resident reps are here. So I would like to find something for them to go back with, which they can, which they must use, and most importantly, which they can't Google. So I'm going to challenge you all to put on your thinking hats, and these are my guardrails. So what it is that I want from each of you is that you'll each give a very short introduction about what you do, where you work, but most importantly, what is it that they have to start implementing immediately so that the future for this continent becomes different next week when they get back into the offices. As you all may already know, there are accelerator labs across various African countries which are currently being designed and are going to come into play. But most importantly, how do these create job opportunities, more efficient and effective governments? And I will keep that within my so-called guardrails. And just on the back of what Philip has just said, I think you all know every single day, every single second, there's over 1,000 pictures being shared on Instagram, over 10,000 tweets per second, and I won't go into all these details. You all know that. So, Cisse, you're next to me, so I'm probably going to throw you into the hot water first, and we will go down the line. So everybody kindly just take 5 minutes. You'll introduce yourself and tell them what is it that they have to be doing immediately so that we definitely become the place that is harnessing our opportunities, our talent, and technology becomes ingrained in how we're moving forward. Okay, thank you.
Thank you. Good evening, everyone. My name is Mustafa Cisse. I'm a research scientist and also a professor of machine learning at the African Institute of Mathematical Science. So my day job is to advance the frontiers of the science in what we call artificial artificial intelligence or machine intelligence, and also to contribute in education in artificial intelligence. So I lead a team of researchers and engineers here in Accra, working on state-of-the-art machine learning research, but also working on using the output of that research to tackle some of the most pressing challenges we have here on the continent. So applying artificial intelligence to areas such as agriculture or education, or improving our understanding of society by analyzing satellite images, for example, or things like that. So on the other hand, as I mentioned, I'm also a faculty at the African Institute of Mathematical Science, where I launched 2 years ago what's called the African Masters of Machine Intelligence. So our friend said a few minutes ago that there is no university on the continent proposing a degree in artificial intelligence. That does exist. In fact, next June we will be graduating our second cohort. Our first cohort has just graduated, and they're already working in some of the best research and development places in the world, including at Google, Facebook, or working with governments or NGOs across the continent, helping them make sense of their data, and definitely decisively contributing in making this technology pervasive and used on the continent for the greater good. So my mission, my personal mission, is to build an axiological machine intelligence. And that means intelligent machines that with behavior and with utility is aligned with the values of our societies here in Africa. Now, we will have, I guess, the occasion to talk about this in the context of what is called the fourth industrial revolution. But I think this is critical at this time because we are talking about technologies that are chiefly designed and built elsewhere, not really in Africa. And for a technology to serve the greater good, for the benefits of the technology to arrive globally, I think it is important that the technology is actually built everywhere, because research and development cannot be detached from the environment in which they are performed. So that's in a nutshell what I do and my background. I forgot to say that I'm 34 years old now, and statistically that makes me older than 70% of the population in sub-Saharan Africa. So I represent the majority of Africans on this panel, I guess, or maybe in this room. So our friend also said before that the median age in Africa is 19 years old, but when he asked, is someone who is less than 20 in the room, there were no hands were raised. I think this is a problem if we're building technology that is meant to serve everybody, and I hope also that we'll have the occasion to talk about this. Thank you.
Good evening. Thank you, kind moderator, for welcoming us on the panel. My name is Ashwin Ravichandran. I work for a very small not-for-profit called MEST Africa. MEST Africa actually has 3 verticals. The first vertical being we have a purely dedicated training program for software entrepreneurship. We started in 2008 in Ghana. We expanded to Nigeria in 2014. We had Kenya in the mix in 2015. We had Ivory Coast in 2017, South Africa in 2016. We had 12 African nationalities represented in our entrepreneurship program last year. This year we have 14 African countries represented in Ghana in our training program. Our training program consists of 60 students, out of which we get about 6,000 applications every year. We basically tour the continent to finding the best entrepreneurs who want to solve this continent's pressing problems. The second vertical within the MEST banner is our seed fund. So we often work with entrepreneurs throughout the year, actually getting them to start investable businesses. We just finished our round of investments, and we've invested $1.1 million across 4 markets in Africa right now, majority being Ghana and Kenya, being completely with African co-founders and actually making sure that they're solving Africa's problems. The third vertical within MEST is our MEST portfolio. We've invested in over 60 plus businesses on this continent. We proudly boast of a few of them being market leaders, such as Mikasa in Ghana, such as Amplify Pay in Nigeria. We are hoping to actually start the next generation of technological revolution, or the fourth industrial revolution, by looking purely at African entrepreneurs who actually want to go ahead and solve African problems using African context and of course using African data. What I would probably want each one of you to actually think about is how important is technology? I think I was just discussing this with the UNDP representative just outside. I left the startup ecosystem in India in 2014 after being quite burnt out. I ran 4 startups there. When I came to Africa, one of the key things I started realizing was that bottom level innovation is still a massive gap here. People are starting to work on products which actually influence the urban without actually looking at the rural. One of the first startups we actually invested in was an Uber for tractors. It wasn't a website, it wasn't an app. It was actually using recursive behavior which farmers had, which was using shortcodes and guaranteeing them tractors within 72 hours once the request had been made. Post that, we've invested in multiple different value chains, including real estate, including e-commerce, including consumerism, including health, including machine learning. At the end of the day, we've invested in purely this continent because we think that this continent is the future. We think technology is not being used often to actually get the right disruption which is required. What we've also realized is that once we start working with African entrepreneurs here, the urge is actually to start connecting different countries. Within our program, we have 14 countries, and we're now actually scaling across more and more heavily into different countries. We've had students from Sudan, Somalia, Cameroon, Angola, where there are no technology or entrepreneurship hubs. But due to cross-collaboration possible on this continent, we've been able to get people here, train them for a year, invest in them, and then actually support them to start scalable ventures. What I think are the possible areas where I think I would love for you guys to start working on is actually starting to understand what technology is being used for in your countries. I think in Ghana, we use technology for the banking sector, for the telco sector. But how often is it used in the ag sector? How often is it used in the last mile, in health distribution? Those are critical areas where we're trying to come in. We're trying to understand how drones can deliver blood. We're trying to understand how actually machines can actually use technology to provide credit to actually farmers who don't have access to credit. So at the end of the day, what I would really like you guys to actually start thinking about is how technology is being used in your country. Maybe understand how the educational system does not need to necessarily change, but actually figuring out what is required to supplement the education system to actually use entrepreneurs as the next vehicle for success. That being said, thank you very much. It's a pleasure to be here.
Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Viola Llewellyn, and I am the co-founder of Ovamba Solutions, Inc. My business partner and myself first met 9 years ago and did the very thing that I absolutely hate when people think they're going to dip their toe into my continent to make some money. And that is using vague comments such as doing stuff in Africa and access to capital is a problem. Yes, yes, so what? So as I made lots of errors and failed forward, we started our company in Cameroon, which is where my family are from. And without boring the pants off you when it's almost happy hour, all I can tell you is that today we call ourselves a trade tech company. What this means is that we are interested in creating technologies that will drive the velocity of capital in economies where the informal sector is focused on the importation of goods and raw materials, because with the fourth industrial revolution, somebody's got to be ready when we start manufacturing our own stuff on our own continent. To do this, we have to step into the gap that banks have not been able to operate within, and that is the extremely accurate understanding and measurement of risk. by culture, ethnicity, and by tribe. It is my concern and my right and my demand that as Africans, we use AI to figure out a genome of success for who we are as we see ourselves, not the imported software technologies, bank credit systems that we use to paper the continent with sameness, so that we end up with micro solutions, micro results, because some twit somewhere assumed it looks real cute for Africans to be involved in microfinance. This is BS. My company measures risk using much more than maybe 700 different parameters compared to the usual bank. We use technology by blending e-commerce, Sharia finance, which is great for the African continent and for trade. We have become the Uber of warehouses because microfinance and micro ideas keep businesses in startup mode, sometimes for lifetimes, generations, and you wonder why we cannot generate wealth. Well, somebody's got to help these businesses to use technology to make better business decisions, smooth out their cash flow, de-risk them on a continental basis, so that as we begin to attract capital in for investment, we can do what we've done, which is produce a less than 4% default rate on a fully collateralized investment product by merely using the environment and the difficulties that are there to lead innovation. Not for innovation's sake, but because the difficult things that need to be done are not always at the same juncture of just technology. It's where individuals are physically operating and need a road to be built using technology to take them from small to medium to large. By giving our customers up to $500,000 in trade finance capital to import their goods, manage their asset, and create dashboards that dictate exactly what is going on, we produce a lot of visibility where many governments don't want visibility. Without visibility, we cannot improve. We have to be responsible in business, and I believe that technology can take us there. The reason this is important to me is because in creating all of this technology, I believe that there is a responsibility for us to curate the psychological mindset of loving wealth in a responsible way for Africans. It is not noble or honorable to be slightly rich or to be just above poor. You must be able to transfer these assets from one generation to the next. We must be able to create products and technology that will enhance that. And I think if you're going to go away and do something that is beyond Google, it will be how do we get young people to ask the question why, which is where innovation begins, and then follow that up with the question of how, so that we can create ways for things to happen, for businesses to grow. I'm not saying we give the finger to governments, but I do say that we should not pay too much attention to the overeducated individuals who are too old to meet the future that some young people are born into. We really need to get this stuff off the ground. So for me, as a technologist, as a woman, as a grandma, yes I am, the democracy of opportunity is where technology meets the human spirit's need to create the best of ourselves as Africans. Thank you.
Good evening. My name is Faisal Chauhan, and I flew about 7,500 miles from Pakistan to Ghana to talk about solving unemployment problem here. So our story starts in 2002. So Pakistan had a first broadband connection, DSL connection in 2002. And we were lucky that we were able to launch one of the first internet business in Pakistan. And we have gone through all the challenges and opportunities that any first business, internet business, goes through in this area. And today we have more than 1.5 million registered members, and one of the biggest platform that is trying to solve unemployment problem in many of the developing countries around. So I wanted to take you back around early 2000 centuries to around 2000. More than 45 countries reps are here from the Africa, and all of those countries and many of the South Asian countries had one of the first DSL connections between year 2002 to year 2005. And at the same time, there exist two stories that I want to share it with you people. One is the story of Philippines. From a export of technology from about $10 million in just 2 decades, it has 37% of the total export of Philippines are outsourcing industry. And it doesn't require any roads, any capital, massive capital, but it was just using the people's skills, the resource, the people, and the skills, and the time zone availability of them. They were able to create more than million job opportunities and 37% of the total exports of the country. Same goes for in the India, that the people were very good in mathematics, very good in customer support, and using the same resources, they were able to create 27% of the total exports of their country through that technology industry. And this goes for 45, 54 countries of Africa, gone through the same period in last 2 decades, same resources, same skill sets, but we are not able to find the similar stories in Africa. And I think I will challenge our host that whenever we talk about the first revolution, second, third, fourth revolution, we always talk about the technology. It's not, revolutions were never about the technologies. It were about the people. The revolutions were about the youth. And the technology was just the enablers, but it was the people who made all these revolutions possible. And I think with Africa, with the youth, and it is possible for them to take this revolution forward for them. And it's not about, it's about the skill economy. The fourth industrial economy is all about the skills. And my fellow said that no, machine learning have a future, the data analysis have a future. And I told you that we teach the basic matrices, basic calculus in grade 5 to 8. And that is the basics for machine learning that is being used in 90% of the machine learning and all other experiences. So with came from where this aid, where the money will come. I think this money will come from the investing in the people, and from investing in the people in very early ages. Right now, the skill sets that require for the next revolutions are being taught in the schools, are being taught in the schools, and those skill sets will make this generation ready for the future. So the next, from the morning, we are talking about the natural resources of Africa. But I think we need to talk about the technological resources, the people resources of Africa. Africa has much more people resources, much more has skilled resources than the natural resources. And in the future, when next day you will be going to your offices, you need to talk about more about that, how we make the people power, how to make the skills power of the African countries, the people that will be bringing the future revolution in these countries. Thank you.
Thank you very much.
Good evening. My name is Kunle Adeyemi. I'm the founder of NLE. And NLE is an architecture, design, and urbanism practice for innovating cities, communities, and specifically, more recently, creating solutions, nature-based solutions for buildings, infrastructure, and planning on water and waterfronts. You might ask me why I'm interested in building solutions on water and waterfronts. 8 years ago, I was actually researching affordable housing. That's after my background working in the Netherlands for a very renowned practice for about 9 years, where I had the opportunity to work in several large-scale projects from Asia, Africa, the Middle East, in Europe. I decided to focus back on the continent, and looking at what I could do to contribute to the continent, housing was one big challenge. And I thought, if you're going to research affordable housing, you have to look at the people who are actually building the cheapest dwellings. And living in Lagos, it occurred to me that people who lived in the community called Makoko, which some of you may know, it's a very poor community that lives on water, on stilts, and they build perhaps some of the cheapest dwellings, and they've built a lot with very little. They have built with no infrastructure, no land, no high technology, no complicated equipment, but they've built a city, a community with nearly 100,000 people. That became a source of inspiration for me to learn from them and to see how we could find solutions to also address some of their challenges. And in 2011, we developed a product called Makoko Floating School, which is actually not just a school, but it's a way to build on water by hand. And I would like to thank the UNDP, because a lot of people actually do not realize that in 2011 and 12, when we began this project, it was supported by the UNDP under the Climate Change Adaptation Program. And that's because while I was trying to solve that problem, I also realized that one of the challenges, the greatest challenges that we have on the continent, especially in the built environment, is climate change. Our cities are getting incredibly challenged by heavy rainfall, flooding, and although Africa is said to be the least responsible for climate change, it is actually one of the most affected by it, with a large area within the high and extreme high risk zones. So it was almost an epiphany one day when it rained so heavily and most of the areas in Lagos became flooded. And I realized that we cannot continue to live and build only on land when we constantly were reclaiming land and creating more pressure on the environmental forces, almost fighting climate change, almost fighting sea level rise. We cannot continue to fight water. We need to learn to live with it. This is my contribution to everyone here to turn your lens towards a new form of living, because this is actually quite a beautiful background I think I see here, where I really think this is the future of Africa, where we have to learn to think about adapting. Resilience will become a very critical thing. So what we've done in the last 8 years is to start with one simple thing, a product of which we have developed over, which we learned from Makoko, how to build simply with local materials, local resources, and with very simple means, and created a solution for building a prefabricated floating structure that you can assemble, disassemble by hand, and we have been able to build it in 4 countries, over 3 continents, and we're scaling up this system as a solution not only for Africa. We see the same challenge in Asia, Pakistan, Philippines, Vietnam, lots of cities are going to be affected by water. If you have real estate and you are by the waterfront, you need to think differently. And that's the contribution that I think we have learned from some of the poorest communities on the continent, and it has now become something that we think will be a solution for the rest of the world.
Thank you.
Good evening, ladies and gentlemen. My name is Naza Alakija, and I am the founder of Sage Innovation Center. We are a nonprofit organization that looks at funding SMEs that come up with bold and innovative solutions to tackle climate change. And again, as my fellow panelists, I also live in Lagos, Nigeria, and I have seen the drastic difference over the past 4 years. And the floods are one thing alone, and another thing which I have noticed is the spread of disease, especially airborne diseases like malaria. And unfortunately, it is not something that Africa has contributed to. However, from what I have seen, it tends to be that Africans are the ones suffering with it most. So those that live within poverty, they're the ones suffering with it most. So what we aim to do is we aim to enforce youth to come up with new ideas, things that haven't been created before, and plug these in, because Africa is still in its early stages and we still have time to plug in these new ideas, new innovations, and create a more sustainable, harmonious environment. And you know, I think one of the things that we were discussing earlier today was closing the digital gap. But I really see that digital gap more as opportunity as opposed to it being a gap, because you know, there is so much we can do, there is so much, and truthfully speaking, the youth of Nigeria and Cote d'Ivoire and Sierra Leone, these places that I've worked before, they have they are some of the smartest and most intellectual individuals that I've ever come across. And they have come up with solutions or ideas that, you know, and it's so neat, so, you know, so different. So, and you know, we don't have to do the same things that everybody else is doing. We don't have to use the same technologies that everybody else is using. And I think another point that we haven't really discussed thus far is clean technology. Technology has so much potential. The fourth industrial revolution has so much potential. However, it is imminent that whatever we are doing, whatever technology we are installing on the continent, it is sustainable and it is clean technology, because it really can go one of two ways. And if we do it properly and we decide to take the right route with it, it will, a really amazing revolution will await Africa, and we will get to a point on the continent where we do have the opportunity to become leaders in technology and innovation. So I really do enforce it, and one of the things that we are doing with Sage Innovation right now is we've launched a climate pitch competition for youth, and we've told them to come forward with some ideas that they think they can, you know, for example, recycling or, you know, carbon capturing or energy. And, you know, these are things that can really get youth to think outside of the box, outside of the conventional jobs that they believe that can generate money. Where our future is not, as Philip said before, it's not, we're going to have to make a serious change, a serious transition within different works of field. And if we're not ready for that, then yes, people will suffer. However, if we start plugging this in as organizations, as individuals, we will be able to give people the opportunity to be prepared for this. And as opposed to us looking at it as a disruption, we can look at it as an opportunity to do something greater, to lead and to be better than everybody else that in this race. And you know, quite frankly, climate change is something that is affecting every single one of us today. I think there's only one person in the world at the moment that denies that's happening, but you know, it is something that's plaguing every single one of us. It is something that, you know, is not going to distinguish between race, faith, or creed. It will, and when it comes, it will come with a vengeance. But you know, we still have time, we still have opportunities, and we have the voice, we have the funds, that when we can mobilize these into the system and encourage children to come up with new ways and encourage children to start living differently through technology and through sustainable living. Thank you very much.
Seeing as I'm the last speaker on the panel, I guess my job is double burdened and follow up all of these amazing comments that have already been made. My name is Bright Simmons, and I started my professional career as an activist, mostly in the civil society movement, here in Ghana and then overseas. And over time, I just got a bit tired of complaining all the time, constantly, you know, try to get government to do one thing or the other, and I just felt I needed to jump into the trenches and do something about the stuff that I kept talking about. So I became an entrepreneur, but my interest in public affairs and my interest in social activism never really went away. So I became what I call a social entrepreneur. And I'm now part of an organization that uses technology to try and amplify trust, by which I mean we use technology to solve problems like counterfeiting of products. Think of medicines as an example. 25% of medicines sold in the region are counterfeit. That is to say, they look like they could heal you, but half the time they're actually causing more harm to you. And we produce technology that enable consumers and patients using their mobile phone for free to validate the quality of these medicines. We do the same for seeds in Kenya as an example, where we make it possible for farmers, when they buy a pack of seeds, with their mobile phone to validate if the seeds are indeed proper seeds. They are not coming from somebody's back shed where they're using rice meant for the table and misrepresenting it as rice that is supposed to be planted. Our latest focus is using computer vision to try and enable nurses at the point of care before they administer vaccines to detect if the vaccine has been properly refrigerated. And why is that important? That is important because if you don't store a vaccine between 2 and 8 degrees, what happens is it loses the potency. And when it loses the potency over time, it no longer confers immunity on the infant. So you inject the vaccine into the bloodstream, but the infant is not protected. Luckily for us, there are polymers that can respond cumulatively to temperature change. So we put some of these polymers on the vaccine vial, and as it changes slowly over time, we take pictures of it until we get thousands and thousands of pictures. And then using our model, we are able then, from any time onwards, when a picture is taken of the surface of the bottle, to detect if the bottle was well refrigerated. So in terms of what Ms. Mustafa was talking about, this is a very practical use of artificial intelligence in a way that, to my mind, is also very appropriate. It fits the context. My concern here, really, and one of the things I would like to leave with you, is this continued tendency to conflate solutions with ideas. Solutions are mere variants and instantiations of ideas. Ideas are broader. A solution is a mere contingent form of an idea. But in Africa, very often I find that when solutions are being propounded, we're quick to jump on board without questioning what are the underlying ideas that are behind those solutions. We've developed a solutionist mindset without ever questioning what is the underlying philosophy. So I've always asked people that are doing blockchain in Africa and said, are you a radical libertarian? And they're like, no, I'm not a radical libertarian. I'm a very strong socialist-minded. I'm an Nkrumahist sometimes. And I'm saying that but blockchain is about fundamental disbelief and distrust in institutions. And if you're an African, you can't really support classical blockchain. And often they're not really thought about it, that the people that initially came up with blockchain, calling themselves Satoshi or whatever it is that they were fundamentally about distrust. They don't believe in institutions, and therefore they believe that you have to use permissionless systems because of that fundamental point. We African, we are communal, or at least we say we are. So why are you pro-blockchain? And often it's not very clear that they've really thought about why blockchain was proposed as a solution. And I've seen that in all my life. I've often seen people try and say, okay, you have a counterfeit medicine problem, but there are mass spectroscopy-based solutions overseas. Why are you using that? And I mean, look, have you actually gone into the hinterlands of Ghana or Nigeria and seen how medicines are sold? If you have, you wouldn't talk about mass spectroscopy, as an example. So my concern is that by not paying considerable attention to the ideas that underlie and empower the solutions that are often proposed, we lose sight of all the potentiality that truly exists in our community. So we've talked about the fourth industrial revolution a number of times. But if I look into the intellectual origins of the fourth industrial revolution, coming from Kondratiev all the way through Schumpeter, how much of that is African? I don't remember a single African scholar, not our best science and technology studies people like Callistus Juma or Muzazi, who just passed away, God bless his soul, talking about the fourth industrial revolution. They had a different conception of the role of technology in deindustrializing Africa, etc. And they had a different ideological agenda. I'm not saying that we become completely nativist and that everything foreign or everything that comes from the West automatically becomes demonic. That's not my argument. My argument is that we should be careful in not jumping on bandwagons when we don't understand or sufficiently are not involved and invested in the ideological agenda that is driving them. We have to determine what is our own ideological agenda, what is our own conception of history. There are countries in Africa where the total access to electricity is 15% or less. The Democratic Republic of Congo, widely accepted to be the richest country in Africa, is one. Less than 15% of people have access to electricity. If the fourth industrial revolution says that the first industrial revolution was steam, and then we had electricity, and then we had information, and now we have the fourth industrial revolution, and there are people in Africa who have not experienced a second industrial revolution, why are we talking about a fourth industrial revolution? Is this agenda really being set in Africa or not? So that's my question to you. I also feel, and this I'll be brief here, that there are discussions sometimes about technology that are not grounded in the core disciplines. So there's a lot of discussion around startup phenomena in Africa that is not really backed by solid macroeconomics and the likes of it. If you look at the scale of startup innovation activity in Africa, it's insignificant. FDI into Africa, almost $50 billion. Investment, VC related into innovation technology, less than $1 billion. Even within Africa, technology innovations are attracting less than 2.5% of capital. So it's really a fringe phenomenon. Then the question that I ask when I look at that is, to what extent, from an economics point of view, from a political science point of view, from a sociology point of view, are we really studying these innovation dynamics in light of it? I'm not seeing a lot of it. For instance, I hear a lot of talk about data and algorithms. And as a practitioner technologist myself, the argument, for instance, that data is increasingly the most valuable does not really hold out in my world. Because in my world, yes, algorithms are becoming very powerful. Yes, data is becoming very valuable. But it's the integrations between the two that matters. When we wanted to roll out our solution, it was because we could connect into MTN. It was because we could connect into Airtel that we could provide a service for free to millions of users across the continent. Now, integrations are more valuable than data or algorithms. But if that was the case, then it means, therefore, that we need to create an enabling infrastructure of integrations that already exist. So that startups, when they want to do fintech, don't run around banks trying to integrate one by one. Because a lot of the costs has come about because the integrations don't exist. Can we create hyper-integrated lattices already existing that startups, when they start, can already plug in? So that will be a very practical contribution that I'll make to the debate. Thank you.
Thank you very much. So, ladies and gentlemen, it's almost time for us to end. But before we end, I just want to make a few comments here. First and foremost, there's 27 accelerator labs coming up across Africa. And we want to ensure that what the labs are going to do, we're going to have a new beginning that will help the agenda that has been set by this dialogue, which is a future beyond aid. And so again, I will come back, and the only thing that I want to hear from you as panelists now is, out of the 27 labs across the continent of Africa, what is it that you are each willing to work with those labs and in which countries, because the resident reps are seated here. So this is your opportunity to start engaging with them, and it's an opportunity for the resident reps to also know who and what is ready and what is on offer. Why do I say this? I totally hate and detest talk shops. So I want this session to have an output that is measurable, and thank goodness that Ahuna has been here throughout. So she will hear the commitments from each of the organizations here and which of the countries they are ready to immediately start discussing with. They're all here over the next couple of days. So just very quickly say which countries you're possibly interested in, which areas you already work in, and what it is that you'd like to do. And that's the only closing comment I'd like to have from each of you so that we can end our day and go for the next thing. And this time I will start off from Bright, and I'll come back this way. So just the countries that you want, and what is it that you want to do with them? Okay.
So we are very active in Ghana, Nigeria, Kenya, Rwanda, and Egypt. So if there are accelerators and incubators that are working in those areas, we would like to explore the area of agricultural technology, but particularly this idea of hyper-integrated systems that serve as infrastructure scaffolding for startups to plug in. Thank you.
We have primarily been involved in projects within West Africa, so Nigeria, Cote d'Ivoire, and Sierra Leone. However, I don't want to limit to country because
Sure.
it's because again I think it's the idea.
Okay. So which challenges do you want to
Exactly.
work around? I think that's what you could
Well,
possibly
climate
say.
change,
Okay,
obviously,
fine.
the
Noted.
things that resolute to living a more sustainable life and potentially creating more jobs, hitting more of the SDGs. But I think if I confining to a country is because
That's fine.
the situation is different for each country.
Thank you, no problem.
Thank you. I'm also primarily focused on the western, eastern corridor of Africa, particularly with our focus on the issues of climate change. And I'll be very interested in working with some of the accelerator labs, specifically on developing solutions or ideas, thanks to Bright, for resilience and adaptation for cities and communities on the continent.
Great, and what I'll just ask you, because I think now I've gotten their attention, just say your organization again, because now they're listening and now we have their attention. Yes.
It's UNLE, and we're an architecture, design, and urbanism practice.
Thank you very much. And just, we'll come, yes, just very quickly, yes.
It's Sage Innovation Center.
Thank you.
M Pedigree and Cold Chain. Cold Chain with a K, not a C.
Thank you. Okay, great.
So our work is mostly solving unemployment problem, and this is a universal problem, especially in Asian, all developing countries. So we are developing the framework where we can upskill people more, in the technical skills and non-technical skills at the same time. So I think we are creating one of the biggest open source platform for upskilling people, and we would like to bring that platform in the African markets so that we can solve one of the biggest problem in this region.
Thank you.
I actually don't want to work with anybody. I mean it.
Okay, so what's the reason why?
Here's the reason why.
Okay, so why don't you
Our
explain that so we
company,
understand? Yes.
Ovamba, is in a stage of hyper expansion by partnering with banks one by one. It's working. We created a product for banks. I don't have the time or the attention or the bandwidth to work with an incubator because it would not create the acceleration in business goals that I have. However, we did partner with Microsoft to build a natural language chatbot. That would be the only reason I would work with a lab if they were further ahead with it than us, and I wouldn't mind what country that is.
Just a minute, let's stop right here because we need to understand the problem. Why is it that you say that an accelerator lab would actually slow you down as opposed to accelerate you. So we can
Here's the
understand
reason why.
what the challenges, yes.
Because you make the assumption
Yes.
that our business and the way we work is something that is easy to bolt into and collaborate with people. That is not always the case. The goals I have and the answers I have to provide to my investors does not include this deviation in this particular way. And that is my perspective as the business owner, as the leader. The only way I would work with an accelerator was if they were faster than us on a natural language chatbot. You and I have chatted before, we should chat some more. Otherwise, I would not have the time or the bandwidth and the respect required to take the time to create the collaborative environment to produce a product. We already have products. We already create what we have. We have organic growth. I love incubators. We would be nowhere without them as an ecosystem. But for the next 2 years, I would not be able to do that in a way that produced appreciable results. There's only one thing I would look for if an incubator came to me, was natural language chatbot, if they were better than us, and we're pretty damn good. That's the only reason.
I think this is like literally walking on a death plank, but as a person who is on this panel who actually his main line of business is actually running incubators and accelerators, I think I'm more than keen to actually work with, I think, the UNDP representatives. We just actually opened UNICEF's lab actually today in Ghana, so quite excited about that as well. I'm more than willing to actually commit, I think, MEST for helping the UNDP representatives in Ghana, Nigeria, Kenya, South Africa, Ivory Coast, Mozambique, Namibia, maybe also stretching a little bit more towards the western in Sierra Leone, Senegal. Maybe if we want to go a little bit higher, Morocco as well. I think what we will try to offer to you is what is the end outcome of actually an accelerator. I think often accelerators exist on this continent not knowing what they need to do with businesses, and that's actually super disruptive to actually businesses itself. Often accelerators exist to actually provide a platform to such businesses. We'll help you identify what that platform is, and hopefully we can actually accelerate this business to the level you guys want to. But more than willing to actually collaborate, more than willing to help. If you guys are in Ghana on the November 30th, MES is actually holding a small session for all the hubs in Ghana to actually see what we can do to upscale them as well. But yeah, willing to collaborate. Let me know how we can help. Thank you.
So I'm with, as I said before, I'm with Google AI, where I lead the research center here, but also with the African Institute of Mathematical Science. So typically what we do with Google AI is to build technology that we make available to pretty much everybody through open sourcing. And by doing that, we enable startups, like our friend startup, mPedigree, or other startups, using computer vision technology that we developed in-house and made available to everybody. We also do it with other technologies such as natural language processing technologies. And all these technologies are actually available and can be readily used by startups in incubators, potentially to compete with our friends, collaborators today, and maybe therefore she will be willing to collaborate with those startups. In fact, I believe that it's important that the larger companies operating on the continent have a tighter integration with these startups, and for the following reason. In the opening remarks, our friends here said that the main asset of companies, tech companies such as Google or Facebook, is the data. I would like to disagree with that. Actually, the main asset of these companies is the number of skilled and smart people working in those companies. Now, we have by far on this continent the fastest growing population. In fact, very soon, 40% of the world's population in working age will be in Africa. What does this mean? This means that the smartest people will be in Africa. I mean, this is statistical. I'm not making up anything. This is purely statistical because intelligence is uniformly distributed. So if 40% of the world's population in working age is here, that means we have the majority of the smartest people.
Now, if we equip them with the right skills so that they can own our future and answer the right questions, and just to quickly say that in that regard that, and I used to work for Facebook before, now I work for Google. These startups working in incubators, they don't want to become Facebook or Google or anything like that. These companies answered questions that arise at a certain time in certain places. We want to invent our own future here. I mean, all these new startups, they will be relevant only if they propose technological innovation, which is different or which is the continuation of what previous companies did. So through originality, we are looking to collaborate with startups operating incubated in these accelerators. If they present really true originality in their mission, in what they want to do, and all those things. I'm definitely looking forward to that. Thank you.
Okay, and finally, I'll also let Philip make a comment, and we'll...
Thank you. Clearly, I created a controversy, but you are valued not because of your employees, but because of your data. The 5 most profitable companies. I think one thing we can give from my side, of course, is our strength on public service. Nobody talked about public sector. I still believe public sector is the largest employer and the largest provider of potential contracts. So I think for me that's one. So UNDP, you can put us down on that. The second thing I think for me is leadership training. As much as the continent is median age is 19.1, those who harness technology are still under 40. Those who lead countries are probably at over 50. So we see a challenge around leadership, understanding even how to employ young talent. We did a test in Kenya, and public service doesn't have, they have statisticians, they don't have data scientists, right? So I think for me, that's the second thing we can do. The third thing I think we can do quickly is how do we evolve a governance framework? Because these technologies require a different governance framework. We are seeing issues around data, privacy, data protection, people not knowing where their data is. And so how do we, and UNDP is good at this. But I think we need an institution that is big enough that has a history to work with public sector and public service, to be able to create policies that are agile enough, that don't stifle innovation, but then still build institutions and resiliency that Bright, I think, is talking about. Because even right now, the countries that are deploying blockchain are not deploying it under any particular framework, and neither are any of these new and emerging technologies. So I think for me, my sense is UNDP becomes that, because of your history in public sector and public service, but also in strengthening capacities of especially schools of public administration, is how do we move from labs, hubs, to those workshops, trainings, to proper capacity for public servants and public service. I say this with a passion because my post is presidential appointee. My counterparts in Sierra Leone are presidentially appointed. When the presidents leave, we leave. We are not in public service. So I think my sense is that, and that is increasingly urgent, that it cannot be a passion of a president that keeps people like me who are champions of technology. It needs to be inbuilt, ingrained within public service, that you recognize that these skills of the future need to be part of public service administration.
Okay, so thank you very much. So let me just make one comment before I hand over to Sheila. If anybody is still doubting just how important developing technological infrastructure is within Africa, I ask you tonight to go on YouTube and Google Trevor Noah, Huawei, and Trump. And the message will be so well home. Trevor Noah, Huawei, Trump, and the reason why Trump had to kick Huawei out of the US is because they're fighting over a $700 billion industry. Thank you, ladies and gentlemen.
Wow, thank you so much. This has been an amazing panel. It's just a feast of so many things just ingenuity, creativity, flair, panache, all those beautiful, beautiful things, which you wouldn't normally associate with a technology and innovation panel. So they're not the usual techies. No, we give you the best. So thank you. Let's clap once more for this special. So now, the foreign minister's here to give the closing, and it's next door, and there's a cocktail, and there's a moment where she gives the closing. So I'd like to invite you to follow us to the next room for the closing moment. Thank you so much.